everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today my goal is to dye some kind of Gothic rainbow colorway. I want a really dark, moody rainbow, and so I'm thinking of dyeing a rainbow with some really dark, saturated tones, and then maybe glazing over it with black. I'm not sure if this will work, if I'll hit my vision for a number of reasons, but before I get into all of that, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Lauren. Lauren, thank you so much for having these Gothic and rainbow suggestions when you signed up to become a lab partner, because I was inspired and I'm very excited to create this video. So let's go jump in! The yarn we're gonna dye today is Knit Picks Hawthorne Fingering Weight yarn. This yarn is 80% superwash fine Highland wool, 20% polyamide. And I grabbed 5 skeins or 500 grams of this yarn and pre-soaked it in some plain tap water. I figure we're gonna start our dyeing project cold with no acid today anyway. And so yeah, I think we'll try to dye 400 skeins plus a yarn mop. I'm currently in the process of filming a color mixing video using dark navy, Cabernet, and honey mustard. And I don't have the finished yarn yet to help me with the color proportions, but I do have a little bit of a gut feel of how these colors are mixing. So I'm hoping that when I take these 3 colors and apply it a little bit by feel on the base color, I should be able to get something rainbow-esque. This is my hope. And if I have finished editing that color mixing video by the time I'm editing this video, here is a picture of the color mixing results that current me doesn't really know. What I do know is that our honey mustard is far less potent than the Cabernet and the navy. This is not a surprise. Yellows are often less pigmented than other colors, because when you get a very pigmented yellow, then you get really an orange. And so yeah, we're gonna need a lot more of our yellow than the other 2 colors to create the rainbow. Let's go give this a shot. I mixed up our 3 dye stocks yesterday at a 0.5% concentration, where we have a ½ gram of dye per 100 milliliters of liquid. And I think I have around 400 milliliters of each of these colors left, probably a hair less. And so max of what I have here is 6 grams of dye dissolved, which means that we can use a fair amount of this on our 400 grams of yarn. I don't think we're gonna wanna use all of it, but we can use a lot of it because the yarn would be able to handle this much color. Although I do wanna be a little bit careful with the Cabernet, but it's good to know sometimes approximately how much dye we're starting with. I don't think I'm gonna measure though. We'll see. Again, I don't think we're gonna add all of that dye that we have, but we have a reasonable volume of water. I think, gosh, probably around 5 to 6 cups of water, just if we were to use all of it. And so I know that that amount of water would be fine for a low-ish immersion on this yarn that I have here. So it's always like a good idea to ballpark things. Now, I did squeeze out most of the liquid here because I want, when I apply liquid dyes onto the yarn, I want it to soak in and go through the yarn as well as it can. I don't know how well the coverage and things are gonna work. We're gonna do our best because I don't think I've tried what I'm doing here today in a steam pan. I may have, but normally if I'm gonna hand paint cold with no acid in a steam pan, I'm more likely to start off with powders, because if I was gonna apply dry powders to here, the volume, I can control the volume of water more, so I can flip things to add to the other side, whereas that's a little bit harder if I'm using liquid dyes. I feel like I have more turkey basters somewhere, but I think that this is what I'm gonna use to apply the dye, at least for the red and the blue, so I can control that a little more. And with the yellow, I may just pour, but let's see how it goes. I'm a little bit nervous, which is a little atypical. Okay, I'm gonna start with our mustard color. Okay, so if we do red, then we're gonna want orange, yellow, and green. So let's just take this and pour. That's a lot. I used most of the dye. And we can taper it. There is going to be a big transition between our yellow as we move down to the other colors. There's really no way to avoid that because I kind of wish I had more liquid in here. How are we doing? Good. Oh, we're getting good color penetration to the other side. Oh, good. I do think I'm gonna go get some more plain water because that'll help me spread the colors a hair more. Oh, that's so good. We're gonna go just a little bit at a time. This is a cup of water that I just added. Oh, I'm so happy. But you can see that as I'm spreading it, the color is getting lighter and lighter, but we've got really good coverage. Okay, maybe not as good in that middle area, but on the edges, we've got really good coverage. Oh, that's so good. Okay, I'm gonna flip just a tiny bit, and so we can add a little bit more dye onto those areas. I knew we were gonna use most of this honey mustard color. Now, we're gonna be glazing, presumably, on top of this anyway. So I think it'll be okay if we don't have like the most perfect color penetration, but I'm so happy that so far so good. Okay, now bringing over the Cabernet, and I should probably move it, even though I don't really want it that close to the edge. Yeah, down here, but just look at how dark that is compared to the yellow. Okay, this turkey baster thing is not working that well for applying the dye. I think I need to have it over the yarn a little bit. Then as we come in here, I'm gonna add less and more down towards that edge. Oh goodness. Okay, let's start working this through. Now the good news is that we already have from our honey mustard a bit of an orange feel there. And I will also add that some of these colors, they don't necessarily ring super true until you've added acid and given it some time. So that is something that is important to point out. But what I want, oh good, we're getting good coverage. My goal here is to get the colors to blend, and they are. It's not super orange or anything, but we are getting a good blend, and so that makes me really, really happy because, yeah, there may be some light areas in that middle, but overall we're getting really good color penetration. And the silly thing, I have this yarn mop, but I feel like it's gonna end up with not very much color on it, so I might end up over dyeing it or something. Okay, but this is good so far. So what I need to do now, because I forgot that we have to do a purple, is scooch things down, because we're gonna need to do our navy. But I feel like our purple needs to have, ooh, just a hint of the Cabernet. Okay, you know what? We're gonna do the Cabernet second over there. We're gonna do the navy first. Because I was trying to remember and I was like, oh, we did get a really good purple, but the purple was mostly navy with then a hint of our Cabernet. I feel like the turkey basters are better for adding on like liquid, like with dyes, versus doing what I'm doing here. We are gonna eventually want the navy to go pretty much all over, but if we start with a little bit, we can always add some more, and I'm gonna add some water on it. But there's a limit to how much we can remove the color. And, you know, will a black glaze show up over a navy? Probably not. I feel like the color that's going to get the most impact there is going to be the gold. Now the question is, how much of a green can we get if we like gently move some of that navy down? It's not the most complete rainbow. And again, I feel like we're gonna lose a little bit of the rainbow feel when I over dye it with some black, but I also think it could look really cool. All right, we're getting some greens. I think part of the issue is that like navy by nature is a little bit purpley. And so then when we mix it with the honey mustard, which I'm probably gonna add more honey mustard onto there, when you mix the navy with the honey mustard, then you get like a dirty green. Okay, but we're getting there. We're getting there. It's a small patch of green, but it exists. I feel like I'm making a massive mess, but it's all on my work surface, so it's really not that bad. Okay, let's come in with the Cabernet, and we're gonna add it mostly to the end, softly, and then start working that through. Which I feel like I'm gonna need to add more navy onto it because it's reading extraordinarily Cabernet at the moment. I mean, because it is, but I don't know how purple we're gonna be able to make that. I mean, it is purple. One could call that purpley as well. One of my other questions will be, am I going to, okay, I know I said I needed a little more navy over there, but I'm gonna add like a dribble more of Cabernet. And then come in with some more of the navy. Trying very hard to not make too much of a mess. And one thing I haven't done is flip things over in a while. Okay, so that is a very, very dark, almost black purple. Again, you can see where there's gonna be an area that is gonna be the most affected by our glaze attempt. And I'll talk about the glazing. A glaze is a shallow layer of color where you can see a bit of what was there originally underneath. And so, since there's gonna be more contrast between black and these colors here, we might be able to feel that glaze effect more there than we can up here. Okay, I am gonna pop my lid onto my navy and my Cabernet, because if either of those were to spill, that would be tragic. It'd be beyond tragic. Okay, and I'm gonna rinse off my gloves. Because I think I want to extend our honey mustard a little bit onto both sides. And so I'm scrunching things, which I'd already rinsed off my gloves, but I'm scrunching things so that way I can apply that color more to where I want. And I want a little bit more of it right there and right there. Ooh, that helped. We're getting now like a beautiful, like almost saffron spice color right there. And that extended our green more. So I think focusing on this where the colors blended was important, but it's also important with those yellows sometimes to extend it, especially when you're doing your blend sort of on site. Okay, the yarn mop is getting more color on it now. That's nice. Okay. I feel like this is pretty good and I need to get some acid now. But you guys, I'm starting to be torn because I really, really like this. Oh my goodness. I I'm not even counting how many tablespoons of white vinegar I'm adding. Editing Rebecca can probably help me out there. I will want to add more water at some point as well, but I am adoring the way that this is coming together. And part of me now is like, ooh, do I actually want to glaze it? Do I want to glaze it, or do I want to let it be and let it be what it is? So I've just added a lot of acid. I'm working those colors through. We can decide what we want to do later on. I can also glaze 2 skeins and not glaze 2 skeins. I hope you let me know down in the comments what you would do and what you don't want me to do. But either way, subscribe, turn on notifications. That's the biggest way you can help support the content here. I'm gonna let this sit for 30 minutes before we do anything else. Because now that we have acid, some, not all, but some of the colors will start to bind in place. And so I'm gonna need to add more water before we go heat this. And so, oh my gosh, I might not be able to glaze it. Ah! All right, I could recreate this rainbow. I could recreate this rainbow as needed. So let's not panic, Rebecca. All right, I will see you in 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, and oh, this is so beautiful. So, so beautiful. All right, I'm coming in with 1 liter or approximately 4 cups of water. And I'm starting to add it at this yellow section, which, ooh, did colors start striking pretty well already? That would be good. I mean, the good news, and things are cold. Okay, there is definitely color in the water. I was like, oh, did things, yeah, the colors will move, but I find that colors move a little bit less when they're cold than they do when they're hot. And so part of the rationale of adding the color where I did, yeah, there's still some color in the water, is that if I added the water here, then that might push the reds more onto the yellow, which is not what we're going for. But even so, there is significantly less color. See about over here. Yeah, most of the color has absorbed onto the yarn. Like when I push down, my hands are not getting as dye covered as they had before. So this is amazing. And I'm now gonna go take this over to the stove. It'll be on top of 2 burners, and I'm gonna heat it for 30 minutes. The important thing here as I heat it up is I'm gonna keep an eye on the water level. And as needed, I can take just a little bit of water and add it onto the corners. I know I had said, oh, I wanna add liquid in the middle, but the edges are also a place where I just wanna make sure that we have plenty of water. No one wants to scorch any yarn. So I'll see you in a bit. Let's set up our glazing dye bath. In my large 12-quart pot, I have 32 cups of water. I'm gonna add 400 milliliters of white vinegar. Might be a little overkill, but I found that amount of acid does work well for glazing. And so I haven't experimented reducing it too much. And then to this, I'm gonna add 50 milliliters of a 1% stock solution of Dharma's True Black Acid Dye. This is a fair amount of pigment because it is a black, but it means that we're gonna have 0.125 grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn, since we're dyeing 400 grams total. And so it should give coverage, but not too dark, hopefully. Even though we do want things to feel like a dark rainbow, we already have a dark rainbow, we're just making it even moodier is the goal. So now we're ready to go as soon as our yarn cools off enough to put it in. Rebecca, you keep talking about glazing. What's glazing? Glazing yarn is a technique where you want your dyes to strike to the yarn really, really fast. So that way you end up with almost an airbrushed effect. It feels like the dye is only at the very surface of the yarn. It didn't go all the way through the plies. And this technique works really well on yarns with high twist, like our Hawthorne fingering weight yarn, because those yarn bases have a little bit more inherent resist in them already. And so the plan is to use a very large volume of water, so that way we can help get the dye all over the yarn, but also high acid, so that way as soon as the dye comes into contact with the yarn, it'll stick to that outside. So we'll still be able to see the rainbow through. Now, maybe at some point, and this is something I should do with a brighter base, like maybe a neon or something, I could do a side-by-side of a glaze versus just an over-dyed version of that colorway. Usually a glaze with a small amount of dye will appear almost darker because, again, the dye is sticking sort of to the surface versus penetrating all of the fibers. So you're technically dyeing less of the yarn, but it's a really, really fun effect and is completely gorgeous, and so I am excited to try this, and nervous, but mostly excited. If you want to learn more about glazing and how I ended up with the conditions that I use now, I have a whole playlist of my glazing adventures. I'll try to link that down below in the video description, so that way you can see why I set things up the way I do. I am curious though, if the yarn, when we add it to our glazing dye bath, is still a little warm, how that might work, because will the colors strike to the yarn so fast that we don't get that light coverage all over the yarn? I don't know. I mean, that's one reason why I start with a cold dye bath, so that way we can get the colors to strike fast but still get it all over the skein. So we'll see. I have been keeping a close eye on our colorway, and there's a hint of some of that Cabernet left. But otherwise, almost all the other color is in the yarn, which is what we want. So now I'm going to turn off the heat, and we're going to remove our yarn. Oh my gosh, this is so pretty. And we got really good coverage on the bottom as well. Oh, I really like this colorway, and editing Rebecca, make all the notes. That backside, all the notes to do this again with these three colors. I am in love. I'm gonna set this aside to cool for a little bit. And as for what's left in here, which there really isn't dye left in there, but I'm gonna bring over our yarn mop that I hadn't really done much to yet. And I'm gonna rinse out the turkey basters, which is almost no pigment, but you can still see it there. This will end up giving us a really soft, pastel, variegated colorway and should be really nice. I'm gonna turn the heat back on. I'm gonna heat this for 30 minutes. Then I will remove it and wash it and hang it up to dry off camera. We have that little hint of yellow, not more. But yeah, I'll show you the finished skein and the conclusions. A very different feel from our other yarn. The yarn is still warm. It's not that hot, but it's very warm. And honestly, oh, it's steamy. Lifting it up, and I'll lift it over here because it's dripping. It is steaming. So let's try this. And I'm going to add it into our dye bath, move it around, raise it up. Oh my gosh, lower it. Oh, that view was so good. Oh, it's so hard to tell because the top is so dark, and I hope it showed up on camera, but what I saw over the yellow looked awesome. Oh my gosh, I am so excited. I'm gonna take this pot over to my stove and I'm gonna start heating it up. I'll be setting a timer for an hour because I find it takes around 30 minutes for it to get to temperature. And then I'll want it to heat for 30 minutes. So I'll go set that up and then hop back in front of the camera. Oh, and dye volume update. We definitely use the most of the yellow, but then between the Cabernet and the navy, which maybe you can't really see, we definitely used less of the navy than the Cabernet. Normally, I don't recommend adding hot yarn to a cold rinse bath. I recommend letting your yarn cool off completely before you wash it. And part of this is because if you have something non-superwash, you could, and it's warm, you can shock those fibers. They could kind of contract a little too fast and end up in a disordered and more felted way. So if something's non-superwash, you definitely don't want to do this. But also, if something is non-superwash, you're probably not going to end up with a glaze anyway. So far, my non-superwash glazing attempts have been unsuccessful. I do want to try again though, or at least my attempts to do it on purpose. And I think that it could work. It could work pretty well to do something like this and to add the hot yarn to the dye bath. It's going to cool off pretty quickly, but that's going to help a lot of color stick to it really, really fast. But it is not always practical to do this. Sometimes if you're going to dye a lot of a yarn that you want to glaze, I'll dye that under layer first and then do the glazing steps. And so that first process of the yarn is going to cool before we get to that glazing step. And yeah, but I have high hopes for this, and it's so hard to not go and lift it and look and see what's happening. But I wanted to try to avoid moving the yarn as much as I can from here and the next hour. Patience, Rebecca, patience. Well, right here we're looking really, really dark. But this is the darkest end with the purple and the blue. Oh, this looks so good. I can't tell about the glaze over the purple and the blue yet, but the glaze over the mustard is so subtle but still reads yellow. Oh, wow. Okay, I brought it over to the sunlight and the rainbow is still there. It's just making it a little bit moodier. It toned down that yellow, but I still see all those tones. I wonder if it'll feel glazed or if it's gonna feel more just over dyed, because usually if I'm gonna do a black glaze, I use a bit more dye than what I used here. Oh, I can see some glaze on this side. Again, I think it'll be most obvious over the yellow where we'll have the most contrast, but I am so glad I stuck with my vision. Now we do have a little bit of red in our dye bath. There's likely some bleeding from our Cabernet, which honestly isn't a bad thing because if it's gonna come out, then like I'd rather it come out now. And I don't think that a little bit of pink seems to have impacted our yellow, so I'm not worried about that. But I wanna move the camera over to where I've got more natural light. Oh, I mean, you can see a difference in the color here and there still, but the rainbow is coming through. The greens are a little covered at the moment, but you can still feel them. You feel all those colors, and don't get me wrong, I loved what we had before, but I still love this yarn, and I don't think I could have made something so moody without doing a layer of black or brown either before dyeing it or after. But now I'm gonna let this cool completely this time so we can wash it. Also keep in mind that the yarn is gonna look lighter once it's dry. Things are always darker when they're wet. And I think our video today is a great example of trust the process, because sometimes I'll be dyeing yarn and get to a point in the middle of my plan, love where it is there, and then it makes it really hard to decide, do I keep going or do I stop? And there was a big part of me that wanted to just stop and not carry on, but I'm glad that I took that risk. Now, could you do that glazing step first? Absolutely. But one thing about this is that is easier to do the glaze second is that it made it easier for me to see the difference between the navy and the purple doing that first, because those are so dark. I think it would have been harder for me to see hue-wise what's happening there if I already had a bit of a gray base. So, you know, you can make those choices yourself, obviously, because you do have a little bit more control over the final wet color if you know where you're starting with. But I am so happy. I'm so happy. This made that yellow so moody. Oh, I'm obsessed. let's wash this yarn. And oh, I think we achieved Gothic Rainbow. And the good thing is the first dips into this rinse bath, and I just added some soap, are showing us no bleeding. And hopefully, if I suds up the soap a bit, that trend will continue, because that would be amazing. And sometimes Cabernet, oh, there's no bleeding. Oh, this is great. Sometimes Cabernet can be a bleeder, but I think that because we heat set it in the immersion bath, that took care of anything that might have come out, because we already rinsed it out. Oh, that's so exciting. But anyway, I'm gonna finish rinsing out the soap, then I'm gonna put the yarn through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry. This purple is so dark. I wonder if it'll read purple. But we're gonna let it dry, and then we'll come back and take a closer look. Here is the finished yarn. And now that it's dry, the one thing I have to say is that we sort of lost a lot of the orange and green that I had mixed. The purple still looks very purple, and there are flashes of the orange. For example, this skein has some good orange right here, and this one has a little bit of the green. But in some of the others, I don't feel the colors that blended quite as much. This one is pretty darn perfect. Oh my gosh. And now like this, you can really see the difference between our purple and that Cabernet color. Of course, everything is layered with the black. And that glaze shows up the best on the yellow because of the contrast. I see a little bit over the blue and red, but it is more subtle and just really made everything super, super moody. I do have one skein where something odd happened. Like this yarn, I guess must have been flipped over like this. Now I figured it out. It was flipped like this. So there's gonna be some areas in this particular skein where the repeat may reverse. And so that's just because, yeah, part of the yarn was tucked the wrong way, which is a shame. I always recommend trying to double check around your ties when you lay things in. Thankfully, this thing does not happen very much. And Lauren, this is not one of the skeins that I am going to be sending you. I need to go look back at the footage from when I dyed it. Yeah, because here I see a reasonable, not a lot, but a reasonable amount of green and orange. But those were pretty fleeting next to the other colors. I didn't make those sections anywhere near as big. And so that's likely the issue, is that they were subtle, maybe a little paler, and so slightly more impacted by the black. So I would either need to make sure to extend those color areas, or probably what I should do is bring in like burnt orange and forest green for those colors and still blend it on either side. But yeah, try to make sure I have that green and orange mixed might be a little bit easier than trying to mix them with these colors, given how much more potent the navy and Cabernet are than the honey mustard. You know, our best skein Twisted Up does have our green and orange in there. And the skein Twisted on my skeined winder is so pretty. Lauren, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope that you're going to love this yarn. I had so much fun dyeing it up. And I'm absolutely going to revisit trying to blend and mix these colors, even if I may retreat back to some of them pre-mixed more secondary tones, just to make it a little easier. I still want to try this again, starting with these exact colors. And I'm really happy that the cold process with liquid dyes worked as well as it did. Our yarn mob today is very different from the main yarn. She is a lot more pastel, vintage, muted, but still very beautiful. Lauren, thank you again for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I love to play around with color. Whether I'm using primary colors to mix deep muted shades or starting with pre-mixed colors that different dye brands offer, you could still do mixing and you can still try to create your own custom recipes and colors. And it's fun to just play around with it and explore that in different ways. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I post at least twice a week and we have so much fun playing with color and yarn. And every month I'll do a couple of live streams and things, and sometimes those happen last minute, which is why having your notifications on is useful, because in theory, YouTube will let you know when I'm live streaming. Hopefully. Thank you so much for watching.